Just a lot. It's a really interesting topic, and we're so excited to get into it. But the whole point of us coming together and having these open discussions and bringing researched information here is so that way we can feel more informed about going outside in our world and also going to our polls and making informed decisions that are not just based on guesses or anything like that. It can only come from fact, because we're in a point in time that we can no longer just be ignorant. When we go to these polling stations and when we're on our ballots, we want to know what is going on. So we're here to break this down for everybody just a little bit and have open discussions. Again, we are by no means professionals. We are just everyday normal people like you, who see that there needs to be change and we've got to do something about it. So here we are, and I'm Carmen, and we've got Kyle, who's actually in Ross's seat, but Ross, he's actually on a road trip. He's in Colorado or Utah. He's driving around, but he's actually on the call, but his service is a little spotty, so he's just going to be a spectator tonight. We've got Sydney, who is a friend of Reclaim Our Vote, who is actually going to help him out in that way and be able to share some information that he would usually do instead. So we've got Sydney, myself, and Kyle, and then we also have Pierre, who's going to wrap up our discussion at the end. She is from Be an Ally. We usually intro her at the beginning, but because she's actually gonna take a portion, we're gonna let her close us out this evening. So we'll introduce her later on. But make sure you guys, as always, our partners, Be an Ally and Black Boys Recycle. If you do not follow them, please do, so that way you can be informed about important Black voices that are in our community who are out here trying to invoke change. So without further ado, I would like to go ahead and dive in onto our topic of police accountability. To start us off, we're gonna have Kyle, who has taken on the topic of the different officials and kind of the breakdown within law enforcement, because what do they all mean? What do they do? What's going on? Who are they appointed? Are they voted on? What's going on? Please, Kyle, let us know.
Yes. Okay. Let's dive right in. And I apologize. I'm also going to be admitting people. So if but okay. So I'm going to break down the terms of police, the differences. Then we're going to talk police unions and the civilian commission, which is weird. Okay, so the term cop or police officer can refer to a patrol officer or a correctional officer or a sheriff's duty. So patrol officers are men and women, or they, them, whatever, in classic blue uniforms whose jobs include the pursuit and arrest of criminals, response to emergency and non-emergency calls, and enforcement motor vehicle and criminal laws. Patrol officers can also be appointed to a special unit such as motorcycle, canine corps, or SWAT teams. That was from the literal LAPD website. So the major differences between patrol officers and a sheriff's deputy is that they have to be in their area of jurisdiction. So basically, sheriff's deputies specifically operate within a county, and their responsibilities are smaller and less than a patrol officer. So patrol officers, I would say, are more of a catch-all, if you will. Also, so our sheriff, right, is an elected official and is it's kind of essentially the CEO of the sheriff's department. Most sheriffs operate under the county government. In fact, the only state without sheriffs are Alaska, and that's because they have no counties. So it's all dependent on if your state identifies and has a county, which is strange to sort of implement law enforcement dependent on counties versus cities versus, it's weird. So I literally wrote facepalm because the sheriff is a part of the executive branch. The sheriff is elected by the people of the county to be a check and balance. Like the executive branch is basically what they determine as checks and balances against the other two branches of government. So and to also be the first line of defense. So not only are they checks and balances for like incoming laws or things that they feel might be wrong in their county or whatever, but they're also checks and balances for the other branches of government, which is something I never knew before. So they serve more than just the sheriffs underneath them, the deputies, if you will. So sheriff duties are allocate budgets to law enforcement departments, important. Arrest criminals, investigate crimes, maintain public peace. They are the final decision on new hires, and police officers, and they perform reviews of law enforcement guidelines. So I think that's like really important to remember is how important sheriffs are and how many, because of the decisions that they get to make. Sheriffs are also elected to 4-year terms in office with no term limits. So they can run, like a sheriff can be a sheriff for like 100 years. So this is where we get into our sheriff in Los Angeles, Alex Villanueva, which we lightly touched on. He was the guy who basically said, if you defund the police, then we'll stop investigating sexual crimes that involve sexual nature in order to like basically scare women. So, and he's really interesting and like good to remember because it shows you, we were talking about this earlier. So he ran on this platform basically that he was a Democrat and they're supposed to be nonpartisan, but he ran on the fact that he was a Democrat and an immigrant and that he was never promoted because of such. So he like had a really hard time raising through the ranks. So he didn't want like other people to have that same issue. So that's basically the platform he ran on and he won. And the thing that people said was, oh, but you have like such a lack of experience in the upper levels. And his thing was, well, you guys never let me have it. So sorry, I skipped ahead. So as soon as he got into office, basically what happened is all of these promises that he made to the Democratic Party, because they came out and supported him, they like endorsed him, he basically rescinded all of the things that he said that he was going to do. And he's failed to show up when subpoenaed 3 times, because basically he's been subpoenaed because of the COVID running rampant in jails. So they're trying to bring him into court to say, what are you doing about this? You need to do something about this. And 3 different times he has just not shown up. He also, which is really, so he has deactivated an alarming number of misconduct investigations, reinstated deputies previously fired for misconduct, and created truth and reconciliation process to consider returning to deputy as many as 400 more deputies and civilian employees fired under McDonnell, who was the sheriff previously, for causes that include unreasonable use of force, lying to investigators, and domestic violence. So 400 deputies and civilian employees that were fired for those reasons, he's reinstated them, which is just such a, it made me want to barf. And we have him for 2 more years. So that's something else to remember. We have him for 2 more years. Okay. A marshal is an enforcement officer of the court and provides security for the court and court staff. Marshals can also be in charge of serving subpoenas and arrest warrants. That's a little bit different than a federal marshal. So a federal marshal is like, it's like one of the U.S. Marshals. So think more like Army. I also thought I wrote down what it takes to become a U.S. Marshal, because they have a lot of they're allowed a lot of force, and they are in a lot of different things and are being used now within our police forces. But to become a federal marshal, most candidates must possess a bachelor's degree in a field such as criminal justice, criminology, or law enforcement, and 1 year specialized experience. They recruit only every 3 to 5 years because few federal law enforcement positions that don't require a 4-year degree. So they just require like a 2-year degree, basically. So you can get like a remedial sort of college requirement to become a state marshal, which is crazy. Excuse me, a U.S. marshal. So state marshal, the minimum requirements are possession of a high school diploma and a general equivalence degree. Applicants must be 21 years or older, and that's for an entry-level position. Extensive experience is not required. Military experience or a demonstrated interest in criminal justice is desirable. That's the qualifications for a state marshal. So think U.S. marshals are like more the Army guys that can be deployed. State marshals are marshals that are put within each state. And then just a marshal has to deal with basically like the court system. They're all called fucking marshal. Rangers, okay. Rangers, at least at the state level office, are limited to Texas. So Texas is the only one who has Rangers. And they are the top of the state police force. Many states also have park and forest rangers that either act as police force or for their governmental subdivisions, or as a naturalist or conservation officers. So many different levels within that. So that's basically the breakdown of the positions. It's confusing, but what's most important is what we're going to talk about next, which is police unions. Police unions are crazy town McGee. The things that I have read about police unions terrify me in a way that I did not understand. Because it's a union, and unions are meant basically like the purpose of a union is to represent the employees against big government or the man or the boss. They are meant to represent the employees of the company and basically fight for their rights. And what police unions have done is just completely ruined it. So police unions work with law enforcement leaders and rank and file members to negotiate better pay and protect the rights of police officers, right? Police unions in general have become the most vocal interest group opposing criminal justice reforms. So out of all of this, the people who are saying no to defund the police and abolish all police unions, right? They have been especially against reforms to police discipline and the use of force. Historically, they have, unlike most unions, been profoundly conservative institutions that uphold a particular white, ethnic, law and order focused variant of right-wing politics. So the history of it is crazy how right-wing and white nationalist police unions are embedded in. They were a huge proponent of why Donald Trump won as well. They were big backers. So as long as police forces exist, police unions will exist in some form as well. So that's what we have to think of when we abolish the police. We also abolish police unions. Even if just as political pressure groups, if therefore it's like a natural to think the reforming police unions in some way would be a bigger part in a broader agenda of changing policing in America. In other words, even it's impossible at this point to change the police, to get the police unions to change the police. So the creation of police unions is crazy and ironic because it was an ironic twist in American labor history. So basically the University of Minnesota labor historian, this guy, wrote this whole article, and it was in response to, so basically he was saying given the creation of urban police forces was largely spurred by a desire to contain union activism and protests. So basically, police forces were created to contain protests and union organizations. And then the police formed their own union organization. The anti-union role of police began to happen in the first half of the 20th century with the coming of the New Deal and the Great Migration of Black workers from the South to the North. The New Deal, okay, so especially there's this thing called the National Labor's Relations Act of 1935, legalized a lot of union activity, including strikes and task managing labor conduct. The Great Migration, in turn, gave urban police another population to police, namely Black people. Policing of Black neighborhoods, drug policing, gang policing becomes what these big city police forces now do. So then we cut to the 70s. Police unions were mostly a super strong ally, echoing the role they would play in many cities as representatives of white ethnic conservative interests in ensuing decades. So basically it's like they became the unofficial poster boys for white nationalists. And in the 70s, this guy, Alfonso Deal, he was a Black police officer in Philadelphia, he began his own separate union for Black officers. And that was for officers who faced discrimination within the police. And he tried to run for office. He was not successful. And basically it sort of dwindled because it was the police force were more interested in resisting affirmative action measures, meaning hiring more Black officers, than it viewed allowing officers who hadn't earned their place to get in ahead of white ethnic and union represented. So basically they were saying, we're not going to even consider affirmative action because they didn't earn their place to begin with. So then in 2018, or the last 4 to 5 years, police unions have gotten out of control and have been given so much power. And they have been doing all these studies on them and have found that the vast majority of the police departments, they give police officers the ability to appeal disciplinary sanctions through multiple levels of appellate review, meaning it's sort of if one court says no, you can go to another one. They're endless appeals. So that's why these officers never get fucking brought to justice, because they just keep appealing and going to different courts and systems. Blah, 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 blah. So, and what's happening is the unions say, well, you should be able to appeal. But what they've done is they've buried it in so much paperwork and so many different loopholes that it's like an out of control sort of situation, good old boys, where there's not even a lot of there's not even records to show for a lot of things. So the rest is, I feel like I'm going a little bit over my time. So qualified immunity, real quick. This was a great sort of thing to think about with qualified. Suppose that a FedEx delivery person pushed you onto the sidewalk, causing you a head injury when you fall. The delivery person would be liable in a civil suit, and so would FedEx. In other words, the police officer and the police. But it's different with government. Qualified immunity generally protects police officers and the other public employees from lawsuits. Meanwhile, a principle called vicarious liberty protects police departments and the city. So, in other words, if this happened to a regular civilian, it would go through a certain amount of courts. But because police are protected by all these fucking crazy laws and the government, they're never even brought to those, they're never even charged. Qualified immunity is designed to protect all but the plainly incompetent or those who knowingly violate the law. Law enforcement officers are entitled to qualified immunity when their actions do not violate a clearly established statutory or constitutional right. Blows my mind. Civilian commissions, really quick, is civilian was basically brought in 2016. It's a group of 9 people in the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. They are all civilians, and it's comprised of 9 members, and the cornerstone of the commission's work is community engagement, and such engagement is encouraged and whatever. But the Office of the Inspector General and its staff works very closely with the commission to be accountable for investigation. So basically it was like created to sort of hold people accountable, which the police union should probably just do, but it's not doing any fucking thing. There it is. That's my piece.
I mean, I have notes on my own that I'm gonna like research more because there's just so much there. There's just so much there. So yeah, that's really exciting stuff. We've kind of got an overview. Thank you, Kyle. I know that was a lot of information, so thank you for researching it, and you always do it in your own way, and we just really appreciate you. So thank you, Kyle.
Sorry, I went over.
It's okay. It's a lot. We're dealing with law enforcement. All right, so we're going to move on to my portion, which I'm covering police reform. I'm going to try to get through it real quickly because, I mean, there's not much to say, right? Police reform. So last month, right, it's June, July. Yeah, wow, guys, okay, wow, I just can't believe it's really about to be August. So last month was June, and that's when the world set on fire, rightfully, in the midst of, you know, the killing of George Floyd. And so I'm just kind of gonna go over some things that have kind of conspired since then. So amidst all of this, Trump has to do something, right? We gotta look to the guy that we call the president. What is he gonna do? Everything's happening. He signs an executive police reform order, okay? What does this include? It recommends that restricting chokeholds are only to be used when an officer's life is in danger. It is not mandatory. It does not ban it. It just, hey, like, just a reminder, maybe don't choke somebody to death if your life's not in danger. It also encourages local police to uphold higher standards on use of force and de-escalation. And also, you know, maybe we should be reporting misconduct to a national registry. Like, maybe we should just start reporting these things. But it's very incremental when we think about the radical change that needs to happen. It very underwhelming in my very humble opinion, but you know, that's from me, it's my view and not reclaim our vote. But yeah, it doesn't really ban anything. It's kind of more so giving guidelines to police conduct. So then if we can just kind of fast forward a couple weeks after that, when we had the spectacle of the Kente cloth, I'm sure we all can remember that, when the Democrats proposed the Justice and Policing Act, which calls for more transformation and a structural change. This kind of more so broadens the police accountability, is a bit more specific within that, within like tracking problematic police officers, reforming police training, because, you know, we understand that police don't have to do much training after all. Also, it includes within this act of making lynching a federal crime, and also bans chokeholds. And then the Republicans, shortly after, they issued their own bill, which was called the Justice Act. And essentially, there are some areas where they have common ground, which includes support for body cameras and the classification of lynching as a federal crime. Places where the Republicans' bill falls short, according to Democrats, include the focus on gathering data about no-knock warrants in drug cases instead of an outright ban, as well as the limited legal recourse it would provide for victims of police misconduct. So, I mean, you know, it does include some important things, but it overlaps where the Democrats included within the bill, but also leave some things out. So, you know, I would encourage you to do your own research to see what more so falls in line with your values. And so here locally within the LAPD, just this week, I want to say even, the 30th, like on Tuesday, the LAPD kind of proposed, and not proposed, they actually expanded an already, it was a bureau that was focused on community safety. They brought in that program, and it's to better understand the cultures and community, and working on how they respond to conflict. The expansion, it was from an existing program that was from 2011, which was a collaboration between the LAPD and the Housing Authority, aimed to address the quality of life and issues in violent crime. There was a study by UCLA saying that this was helpful to eliminate some of upward of 200 violent crimes. So essentially, it's just a LA Bureau focused community relationship building program. We'll see how that goes. Just because we talked about Trump and what he offered as his reform, Biden has been quoted to say that the deck is stacked against communities of color. So although he has actually publicly come out and said something about it, Trump has actually just disregarded that fact, which is notable. Biden has said that he pledges to work with Congress on police reform, and he currently has a proposal for criminal justice reform, along with a plan to eliminate racial disparities within the justice system. That all can be found on his website. Okay, also, just to kind of wrap this up, police reform typically happens on a local level as cities and towns decide how to fund and regulate their own police force. Reform bills that were introduced since Floyd's death on police oversight and regulation of use of force, like banning chokeholds, building this public database for police misconduct, and establishing an independent agency to investigate misconduct within the police force. So these are all things that are done more so on the local level, and the things like with the bills that have been introduced into Congress will help more so shape the guidelines that we are to follow within our own like cities and towns. While most state legislators are out of session because of COVID, bills have been passed in Colorado, Iowa, and New York, and now Connecticut as of very recently. That, and notable, Colorado has actually ended qualified immunity for police officers. So that's really big. And just to touch on it really quickly, it was introduced, qualified immunity, in 1967, originally with the rationale of protecting law enforcement officials from frivolous lawsuits and financial liability in cases where they acted in good faith in unclear legal situations. So it's a little hairy, you know, but that's great that Colorado is very progressive in that way and has completely eliminated it. To wrap us up, I just want to mention that states such as Colorado, Minnesota, Louisiana, Michigan, Illinois, and Ohio have all introduced or amended bills. Now, be very, very aware that a lot of senates and legislatures and Congress, they are not in session, so they can't even really be talking about it right now. So, I mean, there has been some movement within our states that are open. So that's good. But the 4 states that I talked about, Colorado, Iowa, New York, and Connecticut, are the only states that have successfully passed legislation aimed at attacking systematic police racism through improved police oversight and accountability. So that's good news on that note. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and bring it over to Sydney, who's filling in for Ross tonight. So thank you so much for taking the time out. She's a friend of Reclaim Our Vote, a reoccurring participant, and also a shout out to everybody else I see on this call who comes every week, and we see you, we appreciate you, and maybe one day you can do a segment as well on a topic just like Sydney. So please, without further ado, please take it away, Queen.
Hi, y'all. Thank you for having me. I am talking about something very specific and current. I am here to tell you about Operation Legend and break down what's going on in Portland, or what was going on. Okay, it's very dense. I put together a timeline. I'm hoping that this will prompt you to, as Carmen said as well, do your own research on this very thing, because especially if you live in LA, we also experienced a very bizarre amount of anonymous forces. And, you know, if you were anywhere near downtown, you know how it felt, you know how it went, and there's not. Okay, so let's start late May, protests happen, right? On the 29th of May, 2 police officers are killed in Oakland by alleged Boogaloo extremists. So Boogaloo is just like an anti-government sort of underground organization. They admitted that one of the murderers admitted on a Facebook group page that he purposefully set out to assassinate those police officers so that on that particular night, so that it would be conflated with the movement, so that nobody would be able to tell the difference between, and this is a theme, so that nobody would be able to tell the difference between that set of violence and that specific crime and the protests. On the 1st of June, in direct response to that, the Department of Homeland Security makes a statement, and it's just sort of a threat, right? They make a statement that says violence and protest will not be tolerated, and they will be treated as acts of domestic terrorism. All the while, clergy and protesters are being gassed and cleared out in front of St. John's for that fucking ridiculous photo op that it was deeply offensive. Great. Then on the 3rd of June, journalists begin to report the first burgeoning presences of anonymous forces in DC. And when I say anonymous forces, they're seeing people in military gear. They're seeing tactical, what they're describing as tactical agents in military gear. And I'll get into who that applies to and why that's so, like, how random. So then we have on the 29th of June, a sleeping 4-year-old, Legend Taliaferro, is shot in the face in Kansas City, Missouri. The Attorney General uses that particular crime. William Barr, remember his name, he's the devil. William Barr uses that particular crime to justify galvanizing the administration's response to a quote unquote surge of violent crime related, as they think, directly related to the protests. They then create Operation Legend, which is named after this little boy, which gives me chills and nauseates me, like, how dare you? But okay, fine. Supposedly, this whole task force is in his memory, right? So then, still in late June, Trump signs an executive order to reroute the Department of Homeland Security's focus/resources and $61 million to protecting federal property, monuments, memorials, etc. The DHS creates a task force dedicated to the rapid deployment of 2,000 plus officer agents from a bunch of different agencies. And this is the crazy part. The fact that none of these people, none of these agents are specifically trained in riot or protest or crowd control protocol at all is the problem here. So and this is, again, not to defend them in any way, but they're extraordinarily reactive because they don't have the training. So you've got agents from US Marshals, you've got ICE agents, you've got TSA agents, you've got tactical agents from Border Patrol, you've got DEA agents, random FBI agents, and ATF agents. None of those people are trained to do what they're setting out to do, right? Great. So under 3 different, I guess you would call them operations, which is Operation Legend, Operation Diligent Valor, which is the most, like, disgustingly, I don't know, like, American thing I've ever heard in my life. Diligent Valor, I can't. And the Protecting American Communities Task Force. All of this can happen, the deployment, all of this can happen without permission from the individual states, which is where we're at now in terms of discussing the constitutionality of that. Anyway, let's keep it moving. 8th of July, the Department of Justice announces, like, late June, it's in the task force is created, but on the 8th, the DOJ announces the inception of Operation Legend to be executed specifically in Kansas City, because the mayor reached out, basically being like, the mayor and the governor both reached out in Missouri saying, hey, we need some help. There's been something like, they threw out like a random percentage. It's a 40% increase of violent crime since the start of the protests. I don't know how they can calculate that, but okay. Sure. The president and the White House then say in the next 10 days they're going to deploy forces, and they do. In early July 2020, they are also deployed primarily to Portland, as well as Missouri, as well as Kansas City. Now, this then completely escalated. Also, for the record, I believe Portland is now on 58 straight nights, something awesome like 58 straight nights of protest. And the deployment of the forces completely exploded what was already going on. So the agents now begin to retaliate against the protesters using tear gas, rubber bullets, and a bunch of other, I mean, you've all seen the videos, it's really jarring and terrible. Grabbing protesters, putting them into unmarked vans without explanation. And the unmarked vans and unmarked officers part is wild to me. And then somebody came out, I forget who it is, but somebody came out and was like, they weren't technically unmarked. You can see an officer wearing a Border Patrol shirt. Okay, what is Border Patrol doing pulling a protester into a van? And how is that even, like, how is that legal, period? Anyway, mid-July, officials across the country begin to come out to criticize the Trump administration's violent response. They claim that they want the feds off the streets. Trump uses the unrest specifically in liberally governed cities as an example of why we need to double down on force against protesters. The Office of the Attorney General, the Oregon Attorney General sues or begins to sue the DHS and the US Marshals in court for use of excessive force. On the 19th, Portland protesters break into the police association and light a fire. This now then shoots sort of a bunch of different efforts to get the feds off the street in the foot, because they're like, see, this is why we need it. That's federal property. That's technically, because if we go back, that was the whole point of Operation Legend, to protect federal property, monuments, and memorials, period. So then the police and Mayor Ted Wheeler called that Saturday night's protest a riot. And then the acting DHS Secretary Chad Wolf calls the protesters lawless anarchists. And the reason Portland is this like important beacon in this moment is because they're notoriously liberal. It's because they're historically home to Antifa and anarchists and a bunch of other anti-government groups. They've had, like I said, 58 straight nights of protests at the federal courthouse. And everybody is functioning from a different range of ideologies between the aforementioned things and Black Lives Matter. Chicago then also erupts in front of Mayor Lori Lightfoot's house as a result of excessive force used on protesters attempting to take down a Christopher Columbus statue. Then, between the 20th and the 25th of July, the presence of the feds escalates all the protest energy in every single city that they have been placed in, including Seattle. They were here for a bit, which I believe if anybody was downtown during the time they were here, it definitely made everything much more heightened. I mean, nothing like seeing like full tanks in downtown LA, I will say that. So escalates the protest energy, looting, and anti-police sentiment. Then we've got Portland Moms, which is this incredible group of women wearing bike helmets and bright yellow shirts, and they show up to protect demonstrators in Portland, and they begin clashing with federal agents. A bunch of people start screaming like, don't shoot, essentially like, don't shoot the moms, like you would never stand up to. The whole point of them being there and forming this like ring around the protesters was because, you know, they're moms. They get gassed. They immediately get tear gassed. They immediately get like, I don't want to use the word massacred because nobody died, but like, you know what I mean? And then they make a triumphant return on the Monday back to the front lines. But, and I'll go back in a moment, the Kate Brown, I believe, is helping file a lawsuit specifically on behalf of the Wall of Moms because there's so much video footage of them being assaulted, which is amazing. Then 45 announces plans to expand Operation Legend, and this was all last week, to Albuquerque, Baltimore, Detroit, Philly, Chicago, Cleveland, Milwaukee. The New Mexico governor, Lujan Grisham, stated if the Trump administration wishes to antagonize New Mexicans and Americans with authoritarian, unnecessary, and unaccountable military-style crackdowns, they have no business whatsoever in New Mexico. A bunch of different mayors begin to freak out. Mayor Lori Lightfoot is a flip-flopper. At the beginning of this shit, she was very, very excited. She was saying things like, oh, well, if the efforts prove to be genuinely collaborative, we would welcome help in Chicago. Because everybody, again, is attributing rise in violent crime. What they're dubbing as rise in violent crime to the protests. Great. Then this week, she said, in response to the Portland events, she said, we don't need federal troops. We don't need unnamed secret federal agents, because I'm sure her constituency was like, what the fuck, Lori? In a joint letter to Michael Horowitz, who is the Department of Justice Inspector General, and Joseph Kufari, who's the Inspector General for the Department of Homeland Security, a bunch of different people, Jerry Nadler, Benny Thompson, look up those names. I don't want to give you their titles. They're very long, but they all work for like oversight and reform committees and the DHS in different capacities, and they're chair people. And Carolyn Mahoney, they all wrote a letter to the administration and essentially came out to say that that the administration has increasingly abused emergency authorities to justify the use of force against Americans exercising their right to peaceful assembly. So this is the whole point. Are they encroaching upon our First Amendment rights? I would say yes. I don't know the law like I should, but under Operation Legend, under this other thing that I'm about to talk about, I'm sorry this is taking so long, but hold on, I just have so much to tell you. Sorry, give me 1 second. Under the National Defense Authorization Act, which was for this fiscal year, which became a thing last year, essentially, there's argument about it, but it's legal for him to do for the administration to deploy these forces, technically. The excessive force is a different story. So I guess that is why a lot of lawyers and a lot of different attorney generals are going for the excessive force angle, because technically what he is doing is completely legal. And just so y'all know, in the National Defense Authorization Act from last year, that act included a $738 billion allocation of funds to the US military for this year. Okay. Now, the whole point, everyone's frustrated. Jerry Nadler, who's the House Judiciary Committee chairman, said the legal basis for this use of force has never been explained. And the mayors from Seattle and a bunch of other different places, Wheeler, Durkin, Lightfoot, Lucas, Keller, Muriel Bowser of Washington, they jointly called on Congress this week to make it illegal for the federal government to deploy militarized agents to cities against those cities' wishes, describing the deployment as an egregious use of federal force on cities over the objections of local authorities. Now, yesterday, an announcement was made that troops would be pulled out of Portland, which is great. And then another announcement was made of Operation Legend's expansion to Detroit, Milwaukee, and Cleveland. And I believe they deployed over 24 agents today to those places specifically. Mike Dugan, Tom Barrett, and Frank G. Jackson, respectively, who are all of the Democratic mayors from those cities, essentially all said the White House did not consult state governments before releasing that statement, and they were unaware that that was happening. And Mayor Barrett, along with the Milwaukee Police Department, along with the governor, also sent a letter to the administration expressing that this type of unilateral intervention has not been requested by either the city of Milwaukee or the state and is not welcome in Wisconsin. The only comment from the White House has been from the acting DHS Secretary, Chad Wolf, and he dismissed all the criticism from every single local authority that has spoken out, saying that if you're a violent rioter, again, conflating, if you're a violent rioter looking to inflict damage on federal property or law enforcement officers, you need to find another line of work. We will not retreat. We will continue to protect our facilities and our law enforcement officers. So concerns and takeaways, like a lot of people are describing this as the beginning of martial law. I would urge you not to say things like that unless you know what that means, because there are other places that are actually under martial law, and that is a whole different life. I would say there are shades of this. There are shades of dictatorship in all of our president's speeches as of late. I would say Trump is specifically, and has come out and said, he is specifically targeting Lib Dem run states. The light at the end of the tunnel is the lawsuits and the debate on constitutionality. Like, this isn't, people aren't just taking this lying down at all, especially local governments. The hard part about this is that the feds do not operate under the same laws, and it is sort of igniting, the cloudiness and galvanizing, I would say, local police to act with tactical agents and under the cover of tactical agents and giving free rein to draconian use of excessive force. And I'm very glad that people are finally taking notice. I mean, obviously it took tanks rolling into cities for people to notice, but yeah, dark.
Woo.
Sorry, that was so long.
No, I mean, it's just like a lot of information. So it is what it is, right? But thank you so much for sharing that. I know that that was a lot of research and a lot to just get into. So, you know, these are things that are happening outside of our windows. So it's really important that we're informed and we're knowing. So to wrap up on our hour of Reclaim Our Vote, if we go a little bit over, it's okay, because we are, you know, we have a lot of great information, and I don't want Pierre-J to be cut short, because I know that she's got a great topic to close us out with. If you don't know Pierre-J, she is one of the co-founders of Be an Ally, one of our partners. I'm going to put their Instagram in our chat, and also along with Black Boys Recycle, but their representative couldn't make it in tonight, so I'll put both of their Instagram handles in our chat, so that way you can make sure to stay connected with them. But without any other last time, because I know we've got a nice other chunk to get into, Pierre-J, why don't you take it over? And yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pierre-J Lyon. I am a co-founder of Be an Ally, and Be an Ally is a social justice platform that allows for those who want to contribute to the fight, not like just words. We were talking like real actions. Those who want to action their intention in the fight, they can come to our site and they could have access to contribute in any way that they see fit. So the options that we have open at this moment are funding, which means you can give to community organizations that are actually doing the work. You can contribute by providing services. So there are a ton of pro bono lawyers that are giving away their services for free. We also believe that mental health is a very big portion of staying like fit for the fight. So we have regional lists of behavioral health people. And then we also have our Voices tab. Well, our Voices tab actually deals with being able to amplify your voice without having to yell on the front lines. And voting is a way to amplify your voice. So this is why we love to support Reclaim Our Vote, because educating those on what is happening in our local government is a way for us to amplify the vote and to amplify our voice at the same time. A little bit about me. I know I've never like done a real introduction, but I have my bachelor's degree from Florida A&M in criminal justice. I have my master's degree from AMU in criminal justice, and then I am now working on my PhD in IO psychology. So fortunately for everybody on this call, I can clear up a few of the key terms that were mentioned tonight, are kind of not glazed over, but not broken down into how this is actually playing out in our society. So I will be covering community-oriented policing, reform, what defund the police looks like, and finally abolish. I will start with first, Ross. Kyle, when you were speaking, that silence that you were talking about, you were referring to the blue wall. So the blue wall is a code of silence that police officers take. This is not a secret. Like, they refer to the blue wall, the blue curtain, in police, like in their actual courtrooms. So everyone knows that the police do not tell on each other when it comes to like their fellow officers committing crimes, which is problematic, because if this is public information, then why aren't they being persecuted? And you can't tell me that a union is enough to cover that, right? So this theory that everyone is passing around, defund the police. Okay, so when we talk about defund the police, what we're referring to is actually the system. But according to community-oriented policing, which is the function in which our police officers operate under now. So prior to the 1980s, the 1960s, the police force stemmed from actual slave systems, right? So they escalated from being slave patrol to protecting neighborhoods, which was the slaves from, right, the good doers, right? So as they progressed into a police force, there was a lot of corruption. And they were finding that in order to get rid of the corruption, they would have to make partnerships with the community, which is thus how community-oriented policing was formed. Community-oriented policing has been in effect since the 1970s, the early 1980s. But we found that community-oriented policing also gave white cops permission to go into Black neighborhoods and like harass them. And proof of this is actually stop and frisk. So stop and frisk began in New York, and they found that if they stopped those in the Black community, that they could tell them that, oh, well, this is just a wellness check, and they could look for certain things. Well, laws have been created to try to like prevent what's found from actually appearing in court, but we have seen so many videos, thanks to social media, showing that cops are planting things on people, cops are roughing people up for not responding positively to their questions. So with the introduction of all of this social media, the president, not this president, 44, was looking into police reform. So when we talk police reform refers to the actual person, not the system. So police reform calls for accountability of the officer, oversight of the police officer, as well as the professionalization of the officer, because just like Kyle was saying earlier, police officers only spend like what, 12 to 17 weeks in a school. So technically they aren't a profession. So how community-oriented policing and police reform is supposed to create a persona to go along with this professionalism of being an officer, which doesn't exist yet. So this is noted actually in the President's Task Force report. That was it was a task force that Obama created, and they convened and ended their summary in 2015. And it was for cops, which is like community-oriented policing. So this is all like public knowledge. And the purpose of this meeting and the purpose of this task force was to create strategies for implementing recommendations that police and communities need to use to enhance public safety while building trust. Because we all know that if the community policing model has been in effect since the 1980s, and there are still Black people, persons of color being killed in disproportionate rates, then obviously there is no community of trust between the police force and then the community. So Obama's like, well, how can we fix this, right? So he calls this task force, and the task force, the findings are what I found the most interesting. It is known that there is a need for fair and impartial police training. So that is like the first bullet. And what this report says is that cops need to have counter stereotyping training, which is a purpose for them to be able to have positive interactions with people that don't look like them. What y'all police officers look like? And why do we need training to tell people to have positive interactions with people who don't look like you, especially if you are in neighborhoods with people that don't look like you? And research has found, I posted an article under the Courageous Conversations tab on Be an Ally. There's a dissertation that was published in 2019 where he questioned like X amount of police leadership and asked them, did they believe that culture or counter bias training worked? And they polled no, that they don't believe it works. So why are we introducing this idea as a portion of police reform when the leadership is saying that this does not work? Why are we wasting dollars? Okay, so they also found that law enforcement agencies currently do not poll the community to find out if they're doing a good job. Like nobody checks the police because the police is decentralized. Like I think Sydney was saying, she was saying that the police, they're ran at local levels, but there is no measurement of success for being a police officer. So if I come in and I ask the police officer, okay, like what is your job? If your job is to if you say that, oh, we're supposed to build trust in the community, there is currently no measurement that says that police officers are measuring high in trust, even though that is their job to protect and serve. Like, who is saying that you have successfully protected this neighborhood? There's no measurement created, and it's listed right here. And also on the website under like 1.7. Yeah, 1.7. So their recommendation is for the federal government, now you're saying the federal government is allowed to create measures, but the state or the city is allowed to. It doesn't make sense, but we're reforming, right? So the recommendation is that the federal government creates a survey that instructs or prevent local models from reoccurring the expense of having to test the theory of trust between police and community. So they don't want to have to pay to keep getting this test redone every year. And that's why it hasn't been conducted. How much money do y'all have? And what are y'all doing with the money? Like, we have real questions, right? So that is all reform, which is referring to the particular police officer. What is there being done about the system of policing? So the system of policing includes, what did you say, Kyle? It includes the jail systems, the federal prisons, any other aspect that does not include a beat cop, that is a part of the criminal justice system. So that includes your U.S. Marshals, your federal level of government, when we're talking about what we need to abolish, which is the system and not defund. So the definition of defund actually is, well, the theory, it's not even a definition, right? Because I feel like it's social media and it's spinning so fast that, we are right now creating what defunding the police looks like. So the theory is that the defunding of police is a reduction of police budgets with the possibility of reallocation of funds into community initiatives. Now, a lot of people are under the assumption that, oh, if we take 1% away from the police force, that they will give it to our local governments. Well, we learned 2 weeks ago that everyone has to vote on where the money goes. So if the people in office don't believe that our education system deserves that $1.5 million that just got taken from the police force, who's to say where our money's really going to go? So yes, while defund is a cute idea, it is not what we're looking for. Let's move on to abolish. What does abolishing the police look like? So if you've watched any Angela Davis speeches, you will know that this abolish the police is not a new term. This has been talked about since the 60s, because we have been referring to the systems that have been disproportionately holding down those of color, particularly Black men, right? So abolishing the police means that the entire system comes down and a new system can be rebuilt. Now we can introduce police reform because we can put in place those new systems. So if we want to say, okay, we actually need to donate 1.5 million to mental health professionals because we feel as if they need to be on certain calls, a part of our new police system can be inclusive of mental health personnel. Or if we need an EMT to show up every time just in case, then our new police system will include EMT as a part of a 911 call. Like, there are ways that the system can be rebuilt, but reforming it is not the way, and neither is defunding it. So let's talk abolish, because abolish is where the people have more power. And how do the people get more power? By placing the right people in office and voting. That's it.
Wow. Drops mic and walks away.
What you gotta say, Carmen? It's a lot.
Nothing.
Did I give y'all too much?
No, I'm turning red. I have anxiety. Does anybody have? I have anxiety. I feel like this. I mean, this is every day for us. This is what the challenging part of being who we are in the world that we live in, and being able to have these conversations, right? To be able to share this information. It's all things that we knew, but one, low-key an expert. I mean, you're a high-key an expert. You have a master's in this. I mean, I would dare say that you would be somebody that would go to and ask questions about this. So I'm just so happy to have you on this call and for you to be, partnered here with us. And you're just a great resource to have. So I'm blown away. I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready. Sis was ready. Okay, she had her notes.
I told you, I brought the notes for you.
You got the binders out. Okay, she said, well, we covered this in class already.
And I know your name, but you have me messed up because you have Ross written on the top. And I'm just like.
I know. I'm sorry. And I was so enthralled that I was literally like, wait, me? Hold on. She called upon me? I have to say, that was wonderful because I get it. I know what you're talking about, which is the whole purpose of this. Like, It's so nice to walk away from tonight understanding the differences between reform and abolish. It's so nice to understand what exactly is Project, what is it? Liberty? What the fuck is it? Legend. Jesus, they just you know what I mean? It's nice to just be able to, now I know what to say. Now I know how to respond, because it's so diluted in so many ways that, I mean, it takes time to sift through, and it takes actual professionals to be able to not dumb it down, but sort of explain it in a way that people without PhDs can understand. So I really appreciate
people.
Yeah.
We need multiple people, multiple sessions, and yes, this is incredible. And I loved how you came out guns a-blazing. That was just really incredible. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. We have reached our hour time, you guys. We covered a lot. I mean, there's just no way that we can get into every single thing, but I hope that we've done a good job by just providing an overview. As always, we encourage you to do your own research, to look up the terms and different parts of the law enforcement that we brought up tonight, and do your own research. And of course, Reclaim Our Vote, we try to be as neutral as possible and to provide you, with the information. And if you feel away, then you feel away, like some of us do on this call. And if you don't, then you don't. But, we're just here to just come together and have discussions about how we can make our world better here in America of the United States. Now, if you have to go, we totally understand. And we, again, thank you so much for joining us. It's typically weekly on Wednesdays at 7 o'clock. But as we've mentioned before, we had an internet outage here in the Los Angeles area, so we had to reschedule for tonight. So thank you so much for joining us. But we'll be again here next week, next Wednesday, with the same link. It never changes. Please tell a friend to tell a friend. This is where we all need to gather to distribute this information. And then hopefully Pierre could come back on and do a final wrap up for us. I almost feel it's like a little segment we need to be having now. So
I need Sydney back too.
What's that?
I need Sydney back. I feel like I stumble over my words so much, and I'm just so glad that you two were here tonight. I mean, I'm always grateful for Carmen, but I'm so grateful that both of you guys were here tonight.
And we're always open to have other, we this is a community, so it's just we're just here to provide the structure or whatever this is, but having other voices and having you all come and speak and have your own flavor to it is really important as well. So please DM us on Reclaim Our Vote, at Reclaim Our Vote on Instagram. And hey, if you want to cover a topic, or if you're particularly passionate or an expert, or have specialized knowledge within certain topic within the government or whatever is going on and how it relates to voting, please let us know. This is an open forum. So again, if you can't stick around as we have optional discussion afterwards, please do so. But if not, thank you again for spending your night with us, and we'll see you next week, weekly on Wednesdays. Reclaim Our Vote, 7 o'clock.